I love port. Porty, porty, port. Here it goes down, down into my belly. Hello and welcome to the Grape Explorer, where we celebrate the world of wine. On this channel we do wine education, product reviews and lots of tastings, so if you're interested in wine, consider subscribing. You know, port really is one of my absolute favourites, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity today to take you through some of the things you might need to know if you're looking to learn a little bit more about port. Now, port is a fortified wine, very popular in England, and the roots of port actually come from England, and in particular our search for wines. Through history, we've had conflicts with many countries, and we always relied on France to be the provider of our wines. But during conflict with France through history, the supply of wine was cut off, and so the English searched out and looked out for some other countries where they could get some wine, and they found that in Portugal. And when they were shipping the wine back to England, in order to preserve that wine, what they did was they topped up the wine with some brandy to create a stronger flavoured wine. And it was actually something that the English really enjoyed. And from there, port was born. So like I say, port is very popular. It's from Portugal, specifically the Douro Valley. Now the Douro Valley, the Douro is a river that runs through the valley, and the vineyards grow on particularly steep slopes against the river. So as you can imagine, plenty of heat and light being reflected from that river up into the vineyards to create some really nicely ripened grapes. There are lots of different grape varietals available in the Douro Valley to make port, but some of the more popular ones are things like Touriga Nacional, Touriga Franca, Touriga Jorges, for example, although these are just a few of what is available to produce port from. These particular grapes are popular because they are thick-skinned, they're high in tannin, they give some really nice black fruit aromas as well as some floral aromas as well. Once our grapes have been harvested and brought into the wineries, one of the most popular and celebrated methods of extraction throughout the world is that of the foot treading, where teams of people will gather in large vats and tread the grapes by foot to extract all of the juice. Fermentation doesn't actually last that long in the winery, with fermentation being stopped by fortification at around 5 to 9% alcohol by volume. This of course creates a sweet wine, and then a neutral grape spirit is added to that wine to create our fortified wine that we know as port. Those wines are then put into oak barrels for aging and then transported down to the coast, where the cooler climates really help with the maturation of the wines in those oak vessels. And what we end up with are a number of different styles of port. So I've got a few examples here today. I've got some very small bottles to make me look like a giant. These were gifted to me by some friends, so thank you very much for that. And I just want to go through a little bit of the basics around the types and the styles of port that you can get. Now, one thing to stress is that vintage port is only named a vintage in certain years. The producers in the Douro region actually have 2 years with which to declare a particular year as a vintage year. So not every year when it comes to port wine is considered a vintage year. And that means there are lots of non-vintage styles as well. So the most basic and inexpensive style of port is what's known as ruby port. Ruby port is going to be very fruit forward, very mild tannins. This particular style is going to be very bright in colour and is really going to lack the complexity and aging potential of some of the other ports available. You then have tawny ports, which are subject to some oxidation through maturation, which changes a number of factors in that wine. They're going to have more nutty, warmer flavours. They're going to be paler in colour, tawny being the colour, and that's due to the oxidation that's taken place as they've been aged in the barrels. They've been exposed to some oxygen during that aging to create a different flavour and taste profile completely from that of something like a ruby port. You can also buy tawny ports that have been aged for a number of years. You know, you might buy a 10-year-old port, a 20-year-old port, a 40-year-old port, and these are also going to give you different flavours as well. For something like a 10-year-old, you're going to get things like blueberry, raspberry, blackberry, lots of fruit flavours. And as they start to age, so do the characteristics in the port as well. So you then start to move to things like fig and raisin and prune for something like a 20-year-old port. And as you get to something even older, you might start to get things like toffee and leather off them as well. So ports can really go through the spectrum of different flavours, and it's just something I absolutely enjoy. You can also have reserve versions of both Ruby and Tawny ports, and these tend to be better quality grapes that have been used to create them. And for something like a reserve Tawny, it actually has to have been aged for a minimum of 6 years in oak. Like I say, you've got the vintage wines as well, where a particular vintage has been particularly good, and therefore the producers want to be able to name that as a vintage. And a variant of that is late bottled vintage, whereby the port wines have undergone even further maturation in oak, sometimes 4 to 6 years before they are bottled. These wines are going to be similar in style to a high quality reserve Ruby port because they've gone through some filtering and some fining processes to create something really special. Now, if anyone's interested in buying a vintage port and they're looking to understand some of the more recent years where vintage ports have been particularly successful, you might want to look at 2016 for something more recent, 2003 for something else in the 21st century, and if you're happy to go back a little bit further than that, you could try 1994, 1977 and 1963, which are all celebrated as excellent vintages. This particular one, I've opened a reserve port here today from one of these tiny bottles. This particular one has got, for me, it's all that berry flavour. It's actually quite dried berries. I do get things like fig and prune on this particular one. Lots of sweetness with that as well. Obviously it's quite boozy, quite alcoholic. This particular one being around 20% alcohol by volume. Anyway, over to you. What do you enjoy about port? Any particular ports you can recommend? Let me know in the comments section below. I'm the Grape Explorer. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers.